So we've seen quite some general newspapers and outlets talking about the challenges we have with paper mills. This is a copy of an article in The Economist, but there were the New York Times, the Financial Times. So it erodes the trust in science and it erodes the trust in publishers. So it's very important we do something about it. And if our problems weren't big enough, then came ChatGPT, which caused its own challenges. So it keeps us very busy. For that reason, we had a day before the conference, the Research Integrity Masterclass. This was the second one. The first one was in London in December, and because it was considered quite useful and successful, we had another one on Tuesday. And today I want to report back on the results, the discussions, the general themes, and we very much would like to have your input as well. So we're going to have a Q&A. I'm going to do a short presentation talking about the highlights, the discussions we had. Then we have a panel. And we're going to have a discussion with the panel and then the Q&A. And in the panel are two very experienced research integrity managers, also involved with the Integrity Hub from early days. So Sarah Jenkins from Elsevier and Sabina Alam from TNF. And we have a new member of the Integrity Hub since yesterday, so thank you very much and welcome, Daniel Uko from American Physical Society. So they're going to discuss about the themes we discussed on the Integrity Hub, Integrity Masterclass earlier this week. So the challenges we have, for one thing, it is clear we have to collaborate more. We have to collaborate more with publishers, and we have to collaborate more with other institutions and other stakeholders in the ecosystem. We have to collaborate on the level of exchanging more information. We as publishers are quite siloed. So by sharing information and data around paper mills, around the issues, Sabina gave a good overview of all the different signals. By sharing that, that's already very useful to combat the integrity challenges in general and paper mills specifically. We have to work together in terms of policies and frameworks. And last but not least, we have to work together in technology, because it's especially in technology where collaboration can be very effective. Another reason why we have to collaborate more than we used to do, some problems need really joint solutions. We talked about duplicate submissions earlier today. You can only challenge that if you have a system whereby submissions from multiple journals over multiple submission systems can be checked at the same time. There's of course a lot of advantage of scale on the level of technology. There are publishers who develop tools to combat paper mills or to check for integrity. Those can be shared by other publishers. And last but not least, we have to make sure that every publisher in the ecosystem has access to the same information, intelligence and tools as the larger ones. So we don't want to have a situation whereby some publishers have all the tools and all the teams and the smaller ones have not. So for this reason, we started the Integrity Hub in December of 2021. So we are 1.5 years old. And we have a lot of participants. So with APS, we have the 30th publisher, not only publishers, but also very active engagement from other organizations like Submission Systems. I'm going to do a brief overview, but first I talked about collaboration. Again, it's not only with publishers, but also with a lot of the experts that were active. We saw a very good presentation from David. I don't know if he's still in the room. But we very actively engage with the Sleuth, with organizations like PubPeer, Problematic Paper Screener. Again, it's a challenge we have that can only be solved by working together. And maybe talking a bit about the principle. This is the STM trends of 2020, looking forward to 2025. We're going to have a new trends later this afternoon, so stay till the end. This is let's go upstream, and that's also what we have to do with research integrity. We had several sessions on retractions, which is a very painful process, which is a very challenging process. We want to make sure that all the tools and the checks and the intelligence can be brought to the submission phase, so that we don't retract papers, but we catch them at submission, so they don't enter the peer review process and they don't enter the published record. That is really the mission, but we even try to go more upstream. And we also talked a bit about the causes this morning, the pressure to publish, some policies nationwide, which again might have an unhealthy pressure for researchers to publish. So we also engage with that, and we're also having a meeting this year with several stakeholders in the ecosystem like funders and institutions to again think about how we can solve it at the root. Quick overview. I realize I'm talking longer than I anticipated. So where are we now? Very quick update, 3 slides on where we are. In terms of knowledge sharing, so we have 30 publishers we regularly meet to talk about paper mills, talk about signals. So continuously knowledge exchange is already very effective. And we're also active with image screening, also mentioned several times this morning. We actually had 4 very good suppliers that were mentioned that gave their demos. We also have publishers that share their experiences with those image screening tools. And we also have a series of videos that instruct editors on how to identify duplication and image manipulation. In terms of policy, we have a legal framework. You can imagine if we have a system that scans content over multiple publishers, it's very important we do it in a very responsible way, secure in policy, etc. And we're working with COPE on further policy development. And on the level of technology, last week we launched the MVP for the paper mill detection tool. And what it does, it brings a lot of the tools that we all are aware of and some new ones we developed ourselves to the submission phase. So publishers can upload the manuscripts, submitted manuscript, check the references, the text, etc., and get signals for specific aspects of the paper that's suspicious. So it's an infrastructure allowing our content from publishers to be connected with tools, screening tools developed ourselves or developed by third parties. So if you have any tools that I would be interested to connect them, please contact me. Coming up, very important, is a duplicate submission technology tool we built. So allowing, again, duplicate submission is a problem in itself, but also often indicative of paper mills. They submit multiple papers at the same time to multiple publishers. So we built a tool allowing us to scan across different publishers, across different submission systems, manuscripts. So if anything comes up that is duplicately submitted, then we will get, then the integrity managers get notified and they can take action. Good. So the masterclass, we had several themes we discussed. And first was retractions. We also talked about it this morning. It is a challenging process. And what we really found is that the larger publishers, we had 4 large publishers talking about the retraction process, is that it's getting really at scale. So retractions, we heard some numbers this morning. It started with a few, and now it's often hundreds at the same time. And what we really saw in the discussion is that while publishers might have been a bit ashamed of the process, now it's really seen as doing the right thing. And we can be more open about it. It is really a good thing to do it, and we shouldn't be punished for retracting our papers. The scanning at scale and the investigation at scale also leads to its problems. For example, if we have, let's say, an algorithm checking content, how do we make sure the wet is not too wide? How do we make sure that every paper gets the right attention? And the publicity, of course. Having a retraction is one thing, but having hundreds at the same time might lead to some negative news. Also interesting trend is that the investigation very much relies on data science. So several publishers have large data teams that very actively help with the investigation. And the challenge is how do we bring that to the smaller publishers? That's something we're going to address also in the hub, how we can make sure that we can bring that intelligence and those tools also to the smaller publishers that don't have those teams. And we had a session about retractions, an update from the NISR group, focusing on the communication around retractions and removals. It's a big challenge as well. How do we make sure the ecosystem is updated on any retractions that are made? Then we had another big theme was the ChatGPT. If you think this is a very complicated slide, we thought as well. And it was a very in-depth discussion, but the main conclusion here is that it's maybe a surprise for us, at least it was for me, but for the specialists it wasn't a surprise. This was in the making for decades. It was only a question of time until this would come out. And ChatGPT is not the only solution. There is text to text, but there is also image to text. There is text to 3D, there is code to text, etc. It's an incredibly fascinating world full of danger and potential. I think the lesson, we have to be more closer to these developments and make sure that we are more proactive instead of reactive. And then we talked about policies. We've seen the first article whereby an author ChatGPT was assigned as an author. Many publishers came up with their policies, and the conclusion, unfortunately, is not very visible, but maybe we can talk about it a bit later. Many issues. It's not as simple as creating a policy. You have to think about what do you communicate to the editors, to the reviewers, what about copyright, what about privacy, and what about detection? And a sobering message from the session was that so far it is not possible to detect a manuscript for a generative text, which is quite an important thing to be aware of. It's at the moment not possible to detect human-generated text from AI-generated text. And the last session is really a bit connected to that. This is a quote from Elizabeth Big, an expert in research integrity. This was in the interview she gave in the Financial Times 2 weeks ago, whereby she said, AI will likely be used to generate text, data, and photographs out of news. So synthetic text, synthetic images. And when you recall the first session today about image manipulation, manipulation is now based on copying or manipulating existing image, which makes it able to detect. And a lot of the tools that are in the market are based on that kind of manipulation. But if you make something out of the blue, and it also counts, of course, for text. Plagiarism is based on existing text. This can create new text. We don't have the tools at the moment to detect that. And we might never be able to have those tools. So how do we react to that? So we had a session called Let's Explore Beyond the Manuscript. So what else can we do beyond looking only at the manuscript to determine whether something is genuine, whether something is not created out of the paper mill, and whether something is sound science? There were several things that were discussed. One is a sensitive topic, a watch list. Many publishers have their own databases of bad actors. They're kept inside, but what if we share them more actively? Of course, a lot of privacy, legal issues, but still there is a potential there for us to help if we share that information more widely in the scholarly community. Chain of custody, so how can we get more proof, more security about the work that went into research? If we get a manuscript, we don't know what's behind it. We don't know the people. We can't see anything of the research that went into that paper. So what if we get more information and more tangible signals, clues about that? For example, pre-registration. What if we ask every potential author to upload on an anonymous database saying, I'm this and this person, I'm doing this research, I expect these kinds of manuscripts. So if a manuscript comes a few years later, the publisher can look into that and say, okay, that is indeed a person that existed 3 years ago. So that is a way potentially to combat the paper mills. Identity screening. How can we make sure that the people submit the manuscript are the people they claim to be? And is there a way where I can get more validation and verification from other institutes, for example, from ORCID? We had a very interesting presentation from ORCID on the Trust Marker project, whereby it allows the institution to verify the person, giving more trust to the publisher in the submission process. And we talked about other stakeholders, because paper mills, research integrity, it's a problem that we are, of course, concerned with, but it's actually a problem which is more wider and broader. So we have to also look at other stakeholders, institutions, funders, etc. So what can we do more beyond just looking at the publisher? So that was a quick overview. And I would like to ask the panelists for their, let's say, their reflection on the day and the main themes. Maybe start with Daniel. Daniel, you just joined the program. Maybe you can give a bit of impression of the day.
Oh, okay. Let's hope I don't wreck this one just by touching it. Good afternoon, everybody. And yes, Joris asked me to talk about the STM Integrity Hub and why APS is interested in joining it. I've not been working full-time as in my current position as head of research integrity at the American Physical Society, I've not been doing that very long, but one of the things that I learned quite early when I started doing this work in any capacity last year was when my first case came up where I needed to talk to another journal. And my background's in journal editing, which means that I in principle viewed all other journals as, well, the competition. If we had a nice paper, I wanted us to have it and not them. And I won't go as far as to say it was an epiphany, but it was something that really stuck with me. It was just how collaborative and professional process it was to be working with this other journal, and how I was really struck by the idea that we all have a common cause in protecting the integrity of the scientific record. And it seems to me that STM Integrity Hub is a great way to do that, where I'm eager to come there and learn about techniques and about ways of furthering research integrity in my organization and across the board in scientific academic publishing. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe move to the, and please feel free to ask any questions you have. Maybe moving to the retraction process, which again remains a very, very, let's say, complex issue. Sabina, you gave a good overview and I copied one of your slides. Maybe you can tell a bit more about the issues around the retraction process currently.
Yes, so I mean, we know the retraction process is complex, but I think one of the key concerns is that have we got that decision right? Because it's a huge responsibility to basically say that we published this paper, now we're retracting it. What does that mean? And so one of the things that concerns me as part of the investigation process is, are we sometimes disproportionately focusing on certain authors from certain regions because that's where the most scrutiny is coming from? So how do we know that these problems don't exist in papers from authors from other regions? Have we looked? No, we haven't, because we're under this huge burden of concerns being raised from authors from very specific regions at the moment. And so I feel like I'm uncomfortable about that. It is what keeps me awake at night, that are we being fair? We do find problems. I'm not saying there aren't problems, but we're so focused on authors from China, from the Middle East, from Iran, Iraq, Egypt, because that's where the batch cases are coming from. So it's incredibly important that we harness technology to help us to run audits on journals so that every single paper is getting equal scrutiny. And when there is a concern, it's investigated, retracted if needed, regardless of where the authors are based. Because I think retractions have huge consequences on the authors, so we do need to get it right.
I don't know if you have anything to comment on that. How is that for Elsevier?
Yeah, definitely. So I think, so one of the things that I spoke about in the Research Integrity Masterclass, and one thing that's definitely been keeping me awake, is what do you do with those mass investigations? So this is the step before we actually decide whether an article should be retracted. And what we're seeing with the concerns that are coming in is that they are complex. So often there are multiple concerns, and they involve often a very, very large number of published papers. So you can't do what we used to do, which was to manually investigate by hand every single article that's been published and which is wrapped up in that concern. If you do that, it's going to take years to get through those. And that's just not something that we can possibly do. So for us, we've started really working with our data science team to figure out how we can do this at scale, but also with precision, and to make sure that we give authors, and this is really important, that right of reply. So just because we've found a concern, we do still have that obligation to go back to the author to ask for their explanation and to then make a determination as to what should happen next with that paper. And I think we're still getting it right, for sure. Like we're not there yet, but certainly some of the newer data science techniques are certainly the way forward for us.
Daniel, I think you're in a luxury position that you didn't have mass retractions yet.
I'm sorry, can you repeat? We've retracted papers.
Oh, you have retracted, no mass retractions though?
Oh, no, we're still in the bespoke artisanal model of retractions, so sort of individually handicrafted, free-range organic retractions.
Very good, very good.
For now.
Maybe let's move to the AI policy, the JetGPT policy. That is a big theme. it's a two-edged sword, right? It's a huge potential that we have, and that's also something we have to think about collectively as an industry. But at the moment, it's also a threat in the sense that we cannot distinguish by the text itself whether something was generated. Maybe, Sabine, you can tell a bit about the first days of your experiences with this new technology.
I'll give you the less emotional version today, shall I? Yeah, I went very emotional on the first day. So, I mean, with the ChatGPT issue specifically, so I know that there are other AI tools and so on. So with ChatGPT, like we were following the conversation at November, December time. Oh, we need to do something about it. We need to talk about it. And thanks to Elsevier, the urgency with which we had to come up with a policy on authorship in particular was, very, very much accelerated because, we'd been talking about it. What do we do? What are our concerns? Where does the data get stored? And then in January, it became super urgent that Taylor & Francis comes out with some clear policy. And there was a lot of internal debate about this. So we eventually arrived at, let's just for now focus on authorship, focus on acknowledgements, focus on responsible use. Definitely not banning it because we don't know how people are going to use it. You can use it for good things. So let's not be scared of it. Let's not be put off it. Let's focus on responsible use and responsible use for everyone, us, authors, editors, reviewers. We had lots of discussions with legal about what can or can't be done, and that's kind of where we are now. And I guess one of the things that we talked about on the masterclass was we as publishers didn't work together on this. This was a no-brainer. It's a publisher agnostic issue. It's about publishing ethics. Why weren't we getting together in November, December to have an open discussion about what does this mean for publishing ethics? And it was a bit of a wake-up call, I think.
Anything to comment on that? Because I have, but go ahead.
I think the thing that I wanted to comment on actually was next steps. So most of us have authorship policies. I think we've made it clear that we do not consider these tools to be authors. They cannot take responsibility or accountability for the work that is published. So they don't meet any of our authorship policies. But most of us allow, exactly as Sabina was saying, authors to use, particularly when it comes to improving the readability of their article. And that's a massive opportunity. And that's something that we should really embrace. The next thing that we're all thinking about, though, is reviewers. And I think the thing that we're all determined on is that, first of all, we do exactly what Sabina has said. We all get together and we come up with a common reviewer policy. Because reviewers are not thinking, which publishing house am I reviewing for right now? What they're thinking of is, right, I've been asked to do a review, I want to do that, and I want to do it as quickly, efficiently, and as well for the author as I possibly can. And I think the side that we're coming down on is that it will very much mirror the author policy. So reviewers will not be allowed to upload a manuscript into ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT, for example, to generate a review report, but actually should a reviewer wish to improve the readability of their report for the benefit of the author, then that is actually a legitimate use of LLMs.
I think what was also striking is that we all concluded that we have been too reactive for this technology. And again, it took us by surprise. Do you think that we should also be more proactive with this technology? I mean, this morning we heard about the other large language models we could use. How can we apply that technology for our own content? How should we deal with these, let's say, this company? How do you see the next steps and more proactive steps? Maybe start with Daniel, yeah?
Well, I totally agree that we shouldn't be too reactive, and we shouldn't come out with policies that are so locked in time that they will be obsolete in 6 months' time. I mean, if we'd written a policy saying, no, we cannot allow any use of ChatGPT, well, and then we have to update the policy when ChatGPT 3.4 comes out. So, I mean, that's a sort of silly thing, but yeah, we have to anticipate the needs of authors and referees to which they might want to use these kind of technologies rather than looking at centering it around these technologies that exist, but just into the heads of the potential users of it.
Joris, I was going to say, I think for me, the key is transparency. So, these technologies have just so much ability to be opportunities for us, but I think the key is transparency. So if we know how these technologies have been used, then I think we can make informed decisions. If it, for example, we're talking about a manuscript or if we're talking about research. So for me, transparency is the key here. Yeah.
And I think in terms of setting the agenda for what innovations are needed means we need to be much closer connected to the developers that are, the clever ones creating all these tools. And instead sometimes we work backwards. We go, well, what's available? How can we use this for what we need? Rather than co-creating something that would benefit the entire publishing industry. So we need to be together at a much earlier stage.
Yeah, I think that was definitely a conclusion. We have to do it proactively, but also collectively. So I think also STM will seek to play a role there. And looking at the future, also the good sides. What can it mean for science in 5 years? And how can we as publishers play a role there? Which is undoubtedly very, very, potentially very big. So I want to ask one last question to the panelists, and then we go for some Q&A. So we talked about the beyond the article checks. So thinking a bit further than the work we do, which is very important and very useful, but potentially for the long term not sufficient for our aims. I mentioned some ideas. Could I maybe have your reflection on what do you think is the steps to take in that beyond the article vision? Can I start with you, Daniel?
Okay, choose your microphone wisely. Yeah, so the one thing that I'm now possibly addressing Chris here, but one thing that impressed me very much when we were talking on Tuesday was about the trust markers with ORCID. We make a lot of use of ORCID to figure out who our authors are, who our referees are. They're a very good resource. I think that trust markers are going to be very useful in that, but I am very invested and very hopeful that there's going to be a wide uptake, because I worry about the interpretation and the significance of the absence of a trust marker. Does that mean distrust a priori, or what does it mean? Because particularly if the uptake is only from the big publishers and the big institutions and everything, it's going to lead to a further separation between the haves and the have-nots, and I don't think that is very inclusive at all.
I'll pick up on the point of the watch list. So I think while we all agree we need to have some kind of data sharing and sharing of the bad actors, what does the watch list mean? What are the unintended consequences of that? What are the legal considerations? But I think a lot of times when we talk about watch lists, we're talking about authors or people posing as authors. But I want to add into that editors, guest editors who we know are compromised, and we know that editors are prime targets. We have editors every week almost, they've escalated something to our team because they've received these very generous offers, $70,000 per article that they will personally pay to them. And of course, they won't be compromised, but we just need one to be compromised to cause a lot of damage. We need to share that across other publishers as well. But how do we do that in a way that is also responsible?
And I think for me, what I want to pick up on is what we can learn from other industries that have been here before. So if I think, for example, about that concept of a watch list, for example, any of you who have an online banking app, if you got a new phone, for example, you would be shocked if your bank allowed you to log into your banking app without sending you a two-step authentication process. And they do that because they say, oh, this is a new device, logging in with a username and a password. Is this really you? And I think most of us take that for granted, that we would get a text message from our bank saying, here's your code, please put that in. Now, most submission systems that I know don't have that kind of thing. And so if I think back to exactly what Sabina's saying about the watch list, about this uptick of activity from trusted individuals in particular, what are we doing about those accounts that are perhaps impersonating multiple people, for example, are posing as authors, are posing as reviewers, are posing as guest editors? And so I think if we can just go back, look at some of those other industries and figure out what is appropriate for us to take into scholarly and academic publishing, that's going to be benefit to all of us, including our authors, our reviewers, and our editors.
Yeah, maybe in a few years from now we will marvel at the fact that people could submit the manuscript with a Yahoo email address. Maybe those are indeed things we have to think about more.